My friends, in this age of endless information, where every voice clamors for your belief and every screen demands your certainty, the greatest act of freedom is to withhold your assent until reason has spoken. To believe everything you hear is to surrender your mind to the chaos of others' convictions. To think as a philosopher is not to doubt for the sake of doubt, but to love clarity more than comfort. The philosopher is not content to be swept along by the torrent of opinion. He asks quietly but persistently, "Is it true? And how do I know?" It is this pause, this humble insistence on evidence, that separates the liberated mind from the enslaved one. Belief, in its proper place, is a tool, not a master. It should serve understanding, not replace it. Yet we live in a time when belief has become identity, and questioning feels like betrayal. To think freely today requires courage, the courage to stand apart, to say, "I may not yet know." And that admission, that sacred uncertainty, is not weakness, but strength. For knowledge begins not in the shouting of slogans, but in the silence of curiosity. When we cease to defend our ignorance, we begin to discover truth. The world needs thinkers who are neither cynics nor fanatics, who see beyond the false comfort of absolute conviction. The philosopher's mind is both disciplined and compassionate, disciplined in the pursuit of logic, compassionate in understanding human frailty. To think like a philosopher is to remember that every idea, however cherished, must submit to examination. It is to recognize that truth fears no question. When we dare to question, we pay homage to the dignity of the mind, the only instrument through which progress is made. But let us not mistake thinking for cold detachment. Thought without feeling is sterile, and feeling without thought is blind. The harmony of the two creates wisdom. The philosopher is not an idle skeptic who dismantles meaning, but a builder who seeks coherence. To think clearly is to love truth deeply, and to love truth is to serve humanity. When you train your mind to distinguish what is real from what merely feels reassuring, you do not only protect yourself from deception, you contribute to the collective sanity of the world. So, my friends, stop believing everything. Believe instead in the power of your own reason, not as a weapon, but as a light. Let it guide you through confusion and illusion, through fear and fashion, until you reach that quiet confidence that comes only from understanding. The goal is not to know everything, but to think rightly about what you know. For in the end, it is not belief that ennobles us, but the clarity with which we see. And the truest freedom any human can attain is to think honestly, courageously, and for themselves. Consider for a moment how easily the mind hungers for certainty. It craves it as the body craves food, and yet certainty, when hastily consumed, poisons thought. The modern world tempts us with instant convictions, headlines, algorithms, slogans, each promising truth without effort. But wisdom demands patience. To think like a philosopher is to resist that impulse for premature certainty, to linger in questions until the answers prove themselves. The habit of critical reflection is not an ornament of the intellect, it is its lifeblood. A society that forgets how to think carefully will soon forget how to live freely. The philosopher's rule is simple. Believe only when the evidence compels you, and even then, hold belief lightly. For every truth, however solid it appears, stands on the edge of revision. To admit this is not to despair, but to rejoice, for the growth of knowledge depends on the humility of inquiry. The moment we declare our understanding complete, we halt progress. The joy of thinking lies not in possessing truth, but in pursuing it, knowing that every step reveals another horizon. To think, therefore, is not merely to accumulate facts, but to cultivate discernment. to see the difference between what is known and what is merely asserted. It is to demand coherence, to ask whether our ideas harmonize with reality. And when they do not, we must have the courage to let them go. The mind that clings to falsehood for comfort is like a sailor who refuses to adjust his sails to the wind. He may feel steadfast, but he will never reach the shore. Philosophical thinking also invites a kind of gentleness toward others. Once we understand how uncertain all human knowledge is, we lose the urge to dominate through opinion. We become less eager to shout and more willing to listen. The truly thoughtful person does not seek victory in debate, but mutual illumination. Every conversation, every disagreement becomes a shared attempt to move a little closer to what is real. That too is a form of love, the love of truth expressed as respect for the mind of another. If America is to thrive in both spirit and intellect, it must recover this habit of questioning without hostility, of conviction without arrogance. The philosopher's way is not withdrawal from the world, but a deeper engagement with it, an engagement grounded in clarity, honesty, and humility. To think like a philosopher is to live awake in a world that too often dreams in slogans. It is to see through the noise and recognize that truth, though sometimes quiet, is always present to those who care to seek it. To learn to think, then, is to cultivate a kind of inner discipline, a steadying of the mind against the winds of persuasion. It is not enough to reject falsehoods. One must learn how they seduce. The most dangerous beliefs are not those that are absurd on their face, but those that flatter our desires. They whisper, "You are right, you are good, you are among the enlightened," and in that comfort reason falls asleep. The philosopher must be willing to examine even his own satisfaction, to ask, "Do I believe this because it is true or because it pleases me?" It is a painful question, but without it, no progress is possible. This is why education, if it is to serve humanity, must do more than train us to make a living. It must train us to make sense. The goal is not the mere acquisition of information, but the awakening of judgment. Facts, after all, are inert until the mind gives them form. The thinker does not drown in data. He orders it, connects it, sees the larger pattern. Only then does knowledge become wisdom. In a culture overflowing with information yet starving for insight, the philosopher's art is more vital than ever. And yet, thinking alone cannot suffice unless it is joined to moral integrity. The mind must be guided by a conscience that values truth above victory. To reason dishonestly, to twist logic for convenience or tribal loyalty, is to betray both intellect and character. The philosopher, in his purest form, loves truth more than himself. He seeks it not as an adornment, but as a duty. In such honesty there is great freedom, for a person who no longer fears being wrong is at last capable of learning. If each of us were to adopt this posture, humble before the facts, courageous before confusion, we would transform the spirit of our time. Public discourse would cease to be a contest of certainties and become a shared quest for understanding. The noise of accusation would fade, replaced by the quiet music of reasoned exchange. It is not utopian to imagine this. It is simply the logical consequence of people choosing to think instead of merely to believe. Thinking like a philosopher, therefore, is not an academic luxury, but a moral necessity. It is the foundation of peace in the mind and justice in society. For all cruelty begins in the refusal to understand, and all wisdom begins in the decision to try. When thought and compassion unite, we achieve the highest form of human strength, the power not to dominate, but to discern. The challenge before us is not that truth has vanished, but that it has been buried beneath noise. The modern citizen is bombarded with opinions masquerading as facts, outrage posing as insight. In such a climate, clear thinking becomes an act of rebellion. To think like a philosopher is to withdraw your consent from confusion, to say, I will not mistake emotion for evidence. This does not mean suppressing feeling, but rather allowing feeling to be illuminated by thought. When reason and emotion work together, we not only see the world more clearly, we respond to it more wisely. Do not imagine that this habit of mind is reserved for scholars or specialists. Every human being, by virtue of consciousness itself, is capable of philosophy. Whenever you pause before judging, whenever you ask, what is really happening here? You are practicing the philosopher's art. It is not a matter of possessing rare knowledge, but of nurturing an uncommon sincerity. To think well is to live honestly with one's own ignorance and to resist the temptation to pretend certainty where none exists. The practice of such honesty is transformative. It replaces anger with curiosity, fear with understanding, and pride with humility. The philosopher does not seek to conquer the world, but to comprehend it, and in that comprehension he finds serenity. A mind that sees clearly no longer needs the armor of dogma. It can engage the world with openness, knowing that truth, though elusive, is not the enemy of peace, but its foundation. To sustain this clarity in a distracted age requires both solitude and dialogue. Solitude to hear one's own thoughts, dialogue to test them against others. The great tragedy of modern life is that we have conversation without listening and solitude without reflection. To reverse this is within our reach. Every moment spent in genuine thought, every quiet act of self-questioning is a small victory for civilization. The health of a democracy, indeed of any community, depends on such victories. For if we lose the ability to think for ourselves, we lose the capacity to be ourselves. Freedom is not merely the absence of constraint, it is the presence of discernment. To think like a philosopher is to exercise that freedom daily, to examine what you are told, to test what you feel, to refine what you believe. In doing so, you reclaim the most sacred of human rights, the right to understand,